Tom Chase gives me my first break overnights, and I get on the radio and I say, Sunny 106.5, soft tits for Las Vegas. And I go on and on. You're saying tits on my radio station.
Benztown President Dave Chachi Dennis loves radio and all of his radio friends.
Hey, Chachi.
Hey, everybody.
Because Chachi loves everybody.
I'd love to welcome Lori Lewis to the podcast. Lori is the founder of Lori Lewis Media, a social media management, marketing, and monetization firm, advising brands how to create real impact in the social space. I actually have known Lori for years. I mean, who doesn't know Lori? Lori's just had this amazing presence in our industry and has had just, I think, really cool, refreshing thoughts, and someone I've always admired. But literally just a few months ago, we brought Lori on to help us here at the company and to work with us and our marketing team in particular on our social media and just overall counseling from her on how to do a better job with our brand. And it's just been incredible getting to know you. And if I wasn't impressed before, I'm even more impressed now. So I appreciate you taking the time to be on with us. And hello, Lori Lewis.
Hello, Chachi. Thank you. And back at you. I have admired you for years. What you have built and the teams that you build, it's so impressive. I can't even find the right words right now because I'm looking at you.
Well, your advice, and I've heard you speak multiple times, and I think you've just dispensed such fantastic advice and counsel to the industry. And there's so many things I think we owe a debt of gratitude to you because just so many things that I had never thought about until you literally opened my eyes to it. Your knowledge base is just fantastic. And I'm excited to have you on because I want you obviously to share some of that. But first and foremost, I want to learn more about you and how did you become this guru in the social space? I know you started on air in the terrestrial side. You first started in Vegas at Sunny 106.5. Is that correct?
Yes. Let me give you the greatest radio story, one of the greatest radio stories of all time. I'm young. Remember this. I'm like 19, very naive from Green Bay, Wisconsin, not worldly at all. Tom Chase gives me my first break overnights on KSNE. And it's a AC type station, you know, Michael Bolton and Gloria Stefan type music. And I actually love it. And I get on the radio and I say, Sunny 106.5, soft tits for Las Vegas. And I go on and on. And Chase calls, you're saying tits on my radio station. And I'm horrified because at this point, I'm just a young kid. What do you mean? You got to roll your tongue. It's soft tits. And I don't even know what roll your tongue means.
And this is on the hotline he's calling you?
Yes. You're saying tits on my radio station.
Now that's funny. How did you get to Vegas? Is radio something that you wanted to do when you were younger in school?
I mean, I've got the stories all day, Chachi. I graduated high school and I was working, not really sure what I was doing. I was doing a little modeling. And my parents were like, are you kidding me? Like, and I have the most lovely parents, funniest people. And so they said, look, we're going to have a family meeting. And we sit down and we go, we know that this is going to be hard, but we got you a one-way ticket to Vegas. And I was like, what?
That sounds horrible.
You're going to go live with your brother. Alan was going to UNLV at the time. And I had to like cover my mouth, like act like I wasn't smiling. I was like, are you kidding me? And I was like, oh, Mom, Dad, I sure miss you guys.
Were they just that naive or they trusted you and they said, you know what, Lori in Vegas, she's going to be fine?
They knew they had to push me out of my comfort zone. I was so happy at home in Green Bay, doing a little modeling, like nothing, no goals, no nothing. I just would wake up at noon and eat and watch TV. And they're like, we're going to have to push you in order to do something. So they love telling that story.
So you arrive in Vegas to go live with your brother. You get your first gig and you're already first shift. You're getting blown up on the hotline by your PD.
I'm already a shock jock.
How long did you stay at Sunny?
Sunny was quite a while because here's what happened, Chachi. And don't you wish we had the stamina to do this? I did midnight to 6 a.m. And then a few months into it, Skyview Traffic asked me if I wanted to do morning and afternoon traffic. And so that had to have been a couple of years, because I remember doing like midnight to 5 a.m., rushing over to Skyview traffic. It was pretty close to the radio station, and there was no traffic, so I'd always make it in time. Do morning drive traffic on a couple of radio stations and a TV station, go home, take a nap, and then do afternoon, go home and take a nap, and then go back and do midnight to 6.
Oh my gosh, what an amazing work ethic.
I know, and I loved it. However, after a couple of years, I do remember laying on my bed, like asking God, like, hey, I'm over here. Like, I'm not complaining. I'm so thankful for everything that you give me. I'm just saying that I'm over here. And if you ever wanted to change things up, I might be interested. Conversations with God.
Well, obviously God responded, and he did change things up. What was next?
The Edge of Las Vegas. It was the beginning of, remember, alternative rock.
Sure.
And John Griffin was the PD. Dax Tobin, George Tobin's son, he was managing Tiffany. I think We're Alone Now.
No way.
The son of Dax Tobin was running the station, and this is fantastic. Rick McNeal is my morning partner. And he said, look, I know for a fact they've got like 18, 20,000 to give you. You got to hold your guns. You got to stick to that. And I said, okay. And I sit down in front of Dax. Rick is on my side. They go, Lori, we can start you at 13K. And I go, you got it. Totally crumbled.
But now you're doing mornings at a rock station, which you love, in Vegas. I mean, a fantastic market.
And once again, I screw things up. Like, I never could say anything right. Like, La Jolla, California. I called it La Jolla. What a mess.
So from Vegas, you head out East Coast to Florida, Pensacola.
Yeah, like, I don't even, do we have time? Like, this story, like, my stepfather, God bless him, he always says, I don't even understand how you've made it through life. My decision to leave the Edge to go to Rock 104 Mobile, the company that owns Sunny 106.5, the soft tit station, they own, remember, this is like 1993, and there were still some mom and pop companies. And Westcom owned this station in Mobile, and they called and they said, we really enjoyed having you work with the company. We know that you're not really getting any guidance over there, and we would love to see you grow. We've got a great program director in Mobile, Alabama. His name is Andy Holt. He will help you thrive. And I said, all right, well, hang on one second. And I called the guy that I was dating. We had been dating for a while, but we broke up. And I said, hey, look, I got a job offer, like in Mobile, wherever that is. And at this time, I'm like 21 or 22. And I was like, do you think we're ever going to get back together? And he's like, no. He was a program director of a radio station.
He was the program director of another station?
Yeah, we met. I was his little traffic reporter. So there's a little scandal.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, huge scandal.
And I said, oh, okay, like that thick Green Bay accent that I had. And I called the Westcom people back up. I said, yes, I would like to go to Mobile. And that's how I went. I made my decision because the guy I liked didn't want to get back together.
That's so sweet. Were you heartbroken?
No, I took off. Like, I had a Ford Festiva. Oh, you know what? And I'll text you these photos, Chachi.
Yeah, please.
I just found the 5 maps. My stepfather mailed me maps. Think about how we have GPS today. I just found the 5 maps in a big number 1 circle, number 2 circle. I had to follow this map to drive from Vegas to Mobile without getting killed.
That is the sweetest thing. And your stepfather put that together for you. It was like a care package.
Yes. And I couldn't believe I just found them. I was showing my boyfriend, like, oh, these are the maps.
Oh,
it was
that's
like 1993. These were the maps that Dick sent me.
Oh, how nice. That is actually so kind. And this is before GPS. I remember the Big Thomas guides. So
and I have no sense of direction. So how I even got there is God's grace.
But you made it. Is the PD that said, no, go to Mobile, is he still in the business?
No, he is not.
He is not. Okay.
I outlasted him.
Good for you. Good for you. That's some sweet payback. So you and the Festiva arrive in Mobile. What was that like? I mean, that's a big change. You've gone now from Green Bay to Vegas, which couldn't be any different, and now to Mobile, which is completely different again.
Oh, the humidity, Chachi. It was crazy, and I couldn't understand anybody. Everybody had that thick Southern accent, and then I was like a Yankee, right? Because I still had my thick, like, Wisconsin. Oh, hey there, guys. Like, it's a mess. And my first day was April 1st. You know, the more that I start telling these stories, how did I even make it through life? The first thing we did, they were having this worst DJ on the planet kind of contest. And I go, guys, you should hear my first break on Sunny. It's so bad. And they go, no. I go, no, I'm telling you, it's bad. Well, fast forward, Chachi, I won. Because my name was Lori on the radio in Las Vegas and they changed it to Randy in Mobile, we could use it. And they didn't recognize it was me. And every listener was like, that's so bad. Like, hammering me. And I won. I won like the worst DJ on the planet.
So you won Mobile's worst DJ. And I don't think I've told this story for probably 25 years, but I won San Diego's worst DJ.
Yes!
Probably almost the exact same time this must have been like 1997, 1998, something like that. But I won San Diego's worst DJ. The North County Times anointed me San Diego's worst DJ. So I had no idea that we shared these very prestigious titles together.
Do you still have any of your breaks? Because I would love to hear that.
I do. A few years ago, I actually had them all digitized because they're all on cassette. So I do. Somewhere on my hard drive, I have all the breaks, and they're horrific. I was never particularly good on air. But you were. I mean, you've had a storied career on air. Walk me through how you transitioned from Mobile to Tampa.
It's a great story, Chachi. One that everybody should listen to, specifically more women. I think that us women sometimes battle this lack of confidence, and I don't even know where that comes from, but we do. And here's how it almost didn't happen. One of the best parts of my career, it was 1995. Greg Gillespie was our consultant at Rock 104. He called, he said, Jake is going to launch a very in-your-face morning show, and we all have decided you're the perfect person to match with this pretty loud-mouthed shock jock type guy. They weren't saying any names or anything. And I wouldn't have known anyway, because I really was still too young in the business. I said, oh, Greg, I would never be good enough. I could never make the leap from Mobile, Alabama to Tampa. I couldn't. And he said, you know what? I don't have time for this. And he hung up.
Wait, you were trying to talk him out of hiring you?
I was like, I'm not good enough. And I was like, wait a minute. And so we get back on the phone.
So you called him back?
I don't have time for this. You are an exceptional talent, but if you don't believe it, I can't help you. And it just stopped me in my tracks. It's one of those watershed moments. And I said, okay, I'll put something together. I put a tape together. The next thing you know, they hired me instantly and did not play me Bubba's tapes until they hired me.
No kidding.
So I didn't know who I was being paired with.
The confidence I find very interesting, because you said at the beginning when we were talking about your childhood that your parents really had to push you out of the nest to go to Las Vegas. As a kid, did you not have a lot of confidence?
I don't know. Like, I think I was a cheerleader, right? Like,
that takes confidence.
I mean, I'd get in front of everybody and do those stupid cheers.
Knowing you, and obviously I've just really gotten to know you over the last 6 months or so, but I find you to be incredibly confident and you really command a room. You are very bright. And so it's fascinating to me that younger Lori didn't have that. How did you learn those skills?
Well, age and faith. There are still moments where my palms get sweaty, pre-COVID, when we would actually get to see each other and speak. There's moments that I just am so nervous before I speak. And then once I hear my voice and I start, finding a rhythm, then I'm fine. But it was pretty paralyzing in my 20s. Now, as I'm older, it really is just age. 100% believing in what I say. I have seen where I have stumbled at times speaking, and it's because maybe I wasn't really prepared, or maybe I didn't really believe in what I was saying. So it's probably age, a belief in what you know, and then your faith in God.
I find your I guess would be your attitude, but I find it very charming. And there's something about you. You have a charisma that's very endearing, and someone you've just really kind of immersed yourself into our culture so well. And automatically people want to open up to you and trust you. And so I don't know if that was something that was God-given or a craft that you've honed in over the years, or maybe a combination thereof. But I do find it very impressive, because it isn't easy to come into a new organization and immediately have people, I guess, trust you or to gel with them immediately. And so maybe it's just part of that kind of Midwest charm that you have.
Yes, that Green Bay thing. And one area I do believe in what you're just talking about, some things are just inherent. And there's this book, I think it's Grant Cardone, and he's trying to teach people how to be obsessed with themselves, but not in an egotistical way. It really is how little we think about ourselves. And so the book is like, oh my gosh, be obsessed or be mediocre, something like that. If people Google Grant Cardone, they'll see, I think he's on a big airplane or something. But there are 41 questions in this book, and you're supposed to answer these questions every single day for 30 days around the same time. And one of the questions was what you just asked. In a way, it's, what is something about you that's just natural? What's an inherent skill? I always say consideration and being able to come at people from their point of view and not mine. And so sometimes in life we get those little gifts. So I would think it's maybe more of a natural thing.
What did your parents do for professions?
My stepfather is a retired firefighter. My mother was in human resources, and my late father was a factory worker at General Motors in Flint, Michigan.
Are you pretty close with all of them?
Yes. There were times in my 20s, Chachis, that I wouldn't talk to anybody over the weekend but my parents. So yeah, we're all very close.
So you get to Tampa, you've been hired to do mornings. You were obviously frightened, or you didn't have the belief at that moment in your ability to do it, and you almost talk yourself out of the gig, but luckily you called back and got the gig, and now they play you an air check of Bubba the Love Sponge. How do you get introduced to Bubba for the first time?
I was like, oh my goodness, I don't think you can say that on the radio.
And you wouldn't have been wrong.
I was like, oh my goodness. They were laughing so hard. Then they bring Bubba in, and it just felt like he was my spirit animal. I was so opposite of him. But one thing I've always loved, Chachi, are people who are just themselves. Like, no apologies, no filter. And I don't know what it is about people like that, but I gravitate towards them. I'm fascinated by them. I think that I've always tried to be careful in what I say and how I look. And you get these, people like Bubba, and we just hit it off like brother and sister.
That must have been, I know you were doing rock radio, but that must have been just so completely different of anything. And it was different. I remember listening, and just what he was doing was definition of a shock jock at that time was so different than what anyone else was doing on the air. Did that personally, I would have been, oh my God, I wouldn't have known what to do with it.
We didn't. Thank God for Brad Hardin. Brad was our program director at 98 Rock. It was a shit show, Chachi. They put us all together. We're all talking on top of each other. Everybody's blue. And like, you know what? You all are going to have to know your role. And when they got to me, they said, Anita, like Bubba's the blue one. And, we had Cowhead, Big Dick. He was our sports guy. And I know. And Anita, you are the sound of reason. You can have fun, but Bubba's the blue one. And everybody, it's Bubba's show. Like, we had to be told that. And after that, we skyrocketed right to number one. And we went back and forth for years with MJ and BJ at FLZ. We had the time spent listening, and they had the cume. And it was a fascinating battle between the two morning shows.
Oh, and that was a rivalry for the ages. That was just, yeah.
There were times, this is great. Cowhead, he would find out that they would have like a big celebrity, a big type name on their show the next morning. So we were all at Gandy Boulevard. Cowhead would stand outside the building forever waiting for this big name celebrity to come in. And they would be like, hey, maybe it's Rob Thomas with Matchbox 20. And he's like, hey, I'm here to see MJ and BJ. And Cowhead's like, come right with me. And Cowhead bring him into Bubba's studio. Those three, MJ, BJ, Bubba, hated each other.
Oh my God, that's a crazy story. What else? I mean, that time in radio was, I think, one of the best. It was just such a fun era, but you were really at the epicenter of it. Tell me just another story. Amuse me with another Bubba story.
Oh, the time. Oh my gosh. I probably could find this for you. There was a time where David Wells, I don't think he was with the Yankees any longer. And I don't even know how this conversation, I don't even know how it gets there. But we start talking about bald eagle.
Okay.
Do you know what that's code for, Chachi?
Yeah, I do know what that's code for.
And there I am talking to David Wells about, oh no, it's a bald eagle. And he's like, oh, I got a pitch tonight. You're working me off on the radio.
So I'm guessing you had to grow up pretty quickly. Were you still, I mean, you were obviously naive in Vegas. I'm sure you grew up a little bit in Mobile, and now you're just like forced to go from 0 to 60 in a fraction of a second.
There's no doubt when things come naturally, you are around the right people at that time in your life. And there's no doubt that tongue in cheek came naturally to me. They pulled it out of me, and we all genuinely liked being around each other. So it was wild. But again, it goes back to Brad Hardin sitting us down and explaining to us that we all had unique roles. And perhaps that's what's missing sometimes in morning radio today, when you hear like, she says, he says, and nobody's telling anybody what their roles are.
You're, I think, 100% right. Shows used to be cast like a TV show. A radio show was, and everyone had a role.
And Bubba, one time, here's a great Bubba story. This is what we would say on the air that you could never say today. I was, for some reason, in the hospital. I think like I had probably like a urinary tract infection. Whatever, you know what I mean? Something like something like lame and embarrassing, or maybe I made it up. Whatever it was, they called me on the air from the hospital room, and I was like, I can't stand it here. I was really bitchy, and Bubba said, you keep that attitude up, they're going to ass your food up. And so it became an entire bit about assing my food up. I mean, it's just that kind of stuff. It just can't happen anymore.
There was a genius, and I'm sure still is. I don't know Bubba, but I can tell you as a fan, an absolute genius about him. And you brought up something interesting at the beginning of this conversation about an authenticity. He made no apologies for who he was or who he is. And this authenticity, I think, was so different at that time because we all played these characters that were probably, for lack of a better word, BS-y. And I think radio at that time wasn't as real as it could have been. And so he was way ahead of his time. Do you think that authenticity, though, eventually got in the way of himself, or caused him to get in the way of himself?
It's such a great question. I don't know. He deep down is a genuine good person. So I'm not sure, because I never got to that level, Chachi. When you get to a level of such financial success,
right?
Do you lose your way a little bit? And do you start thinking, I don't have to play by the rules? I don't know. I mean, when I left him, and actually when we last spoke, he was still the same person. So you have to think, well, maybe it's part of success. Maybe some people just don't know how to, the word manage it? It
happens to athletes. It happens to actors. But here was a man who was Howard Stern literally endorsed this guy and put him on, one of his Sirius channels. I mean, it's amazing just the people that believed in him and his ability. And it was almost liken it to, you're a football person, but kind of like Ryan Leaf it's not even, Ryan Leaf wouldn't be a good example of the Chargers because he never did well in the NFL. But Bubba, started off in the pros and looked so fantastic. He was almost Bo Jackson maybe, but Bo Jackson got injured. So that's another bad analogy, but you know where I'm going with this. And you're just like, man, he really should have been this gigantic icon still today. And it's kind of sad that it just never happened.
Yeah. But you know what? He taught me a lot. There's no doubt. everything that we all did together as a show, there's no doubt it bleeds into how I approach marketing in the social space today. If you think about it, a couple of things that I always say when I'm working with, certain radio stations or personalities, every person counts and never miss an opportunity to be good to people. That's kind of my theme and where I come. And if you go back to 1995, that's kind of who we were. Every person counted. The chronic listeners, the big fans, they all had nicknames. So they felt like they mattered. We reminded them that they mattered. And we always found time to create those holy crap moments that I call, those moments that people will always remember. We built a loyal following that was unbreakable. And we did it through the word that you used, authenticity. And so, there's no doubt building that fan base without social media helped me today doing what I'm doing.
Interesting. And by the way, and I do not mean it at all to knock on him, because the difference between Bubba and myself is Bubba played. He was on the field and he played at that level. I never played at that level. And so I've got the utmost respect. He was there, and I would never count him out. I know he's doing Twitch, right? That's where he is now?
He's on Twitch, and he did just sign. I wish I could remember the radio station, but he did just sign with a station somewhere in Florida.
Good for him. Didn't they name it after him? That was maybe in the past?
In the past.
All right,
yeah.
Got it. Well, good for him. Thank you for sharing those stories. Just as a fan and a geek,
and those are the clean stories.
So from Bubba, you actually now cross over from being on the air to now becoming a program director.
I knew that Bubba the Love Sponge show for my career was lightning in a bottle. It would never be replicated, ever. That was art. That was not science. Art, you cannot replicate. And so I had to make the hard choice and admit, if you go anywhere else and try to be on the radio, and this is very important for people to attach to that are listening, at some point, what we're doing runs its course. And one of the scariest things is to admit it and go, oh my God, I got to go do something new. I never would have been happy had I stayed anywhere on air, because that was probably the threshold of how big my on-air career would go. So I asked Clear Channel if they would teach me how to be a program director. And they were so generous. They did. I ended up moving to Baltimore and running B104. It was a classic rock station. Another very humbling story, but it's so great. Jim Dolan is my general manager, and I'm going for the gig. Scott Lindy is running WPOC at the time. And Scott Lindy and I go back to our Mobile, Alabama days. So we're reunited. There's already a friendship there. There's already a trust. He's mentoring me and trying to get this. I'm an APD, getting the PD stripes. And Dolan walks into Lindy's office one day, and he's like, does that girl have a mind of her own? And Lindy's like, yeah, why, man? What's going on? He goes, every time I ask her a question, she says, well, Scott says this. Well, Scott thinks this. Well, Scott did it this way. Scott Lindy had to sit me down and say, Lori, it's commendable that you're giving me credit for all of this stuff, but you've got to stop. This guy needs to know that you own it. So even if it's something I taught you, you've got to own it and run with it. And so I had to, so humble.
So humble. I mean, I absolutely love that about you, because you very rarely hear these stories. Generally, most people.
It's so embarrassing. But, fast forward, I was working with a couple of marketing girls for a radio cluster out west. And I heard one of the girls say, well, I told him Lori said this, and Lori did this, and I stopped her. And I said, I'm going to tell you something, and it's not to embarrass you. I said, a great humbling story has just come full circle. I shared the story with her. The next time you go to your PD, even if it's my word, thought, anything, it's now yours. That's why I'm here, to strengthen you, to build you up. And so it's kind of cool. Some of these stories that might embarrass or humble us early on, they eventually start having meaning in our life.
That's a great mentor advice for sure, and something I find very charming. So you become the PD in Baltimore, APD first, you do that, and then you get now the chair. What did that feel like?
Holy shit. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Make it till you make it. And it's rock for a couple of years. And then my worst nightmare in regards to format, they go, Lori, come here. And they're like, what? We just fired everybody but you. And I'm like, wait, what? It's like 6:00 and it's a Monday night. I know, because it's Monday Night Football. And they said, look, we did some research, quote unquote research. Right. And we found that there's a hole for smooth jazz in Baltimore.
Oh my gosh.
Like, I go, holy hell, I don't even know what that is. Like, why did you keep me? And they said, you're the hardest working person in the building. You'll figure it out.
Wow.
And I called a friend. I'm crying on my way home. And I said, my career is over before it even started. And he's like, what? We're flipping to freaking smooth jazz. I don't know that shit. I'm crying. But I get myself together the next morning and drive in, meet with the consultant, and not only start learning the format, because it's the right thing to do. The radio station gets nominated for Smooth Jazz Station of the Year a couple of times. I actually win one of the awards, which, by the way, I got to tell you the award story somewhere down the road in this interview. But we started winning awards. The artists, Dave Koz, all these big artists would come to Baltimore, not LA, not New York. If they had a CD out, they would come to Baltimore because they always said, Lori will do it right. It was a Tuesday night, and Wayman Tisdale, he got into the format. And it was a Tuesday night, rainy night in Baltimore, cold. People are wrapped around the Circuit City just to support Wayman Tisdale, buy his CD and get it signed. So I did the right thing. I went home, I cried, I got drunk, and then I picked myself up in the morning and got it done.
Hey, I think that's a phenomenal piece of advice, because I've had so many friends say to me, well, I'm a hot AC PD or I'm a CHR PD, and they can't see themselves being a program director for another format. And the fact that you could go from rock to smooth jazz, which couldn't be any more polar opposite of each other.
Well, I think it was Paul Hine when he worked for Billboard. I think he said, in radio's most odd trajectory, she went from Anita Wad to smooth jazz program director of the year. I gotta find that article. But it was like the most odd move in radio's history.
Oh my God. So from Baltimore, you now pivot and you go to work for Duke Wright.
Yes. So here's another moment. Geez, these little moments of inspiration, hopefully, for everybody listening. It's 2008. I think it's one of Clear Channel's first riffs. It's a smaller one because the bigger one, I think, came in 2009. Were you part of 2009?
I was. Yep. I was 2009.
Okay. So I was
President Obama's inauguration day.
Yeah. So I was so bad that I was like May of 2008. Like, get rid of all the crappy ones right now.
You were the moosh boosh of the riffs.
So bad. I was on the top of the get rid of list.
Well, I don't even know what course they're on now. It's
and I get downsized, and it's tough. Look, all of the guys that downsized me are the guys that actually raised me in radio. So it's all my old Tampa guys that are now either also overseeing Baltimore or they had since moved to Baltimore, D.C. It was a lesson in letting go because I was really hurt. I had never been fired / downsized in my life. So I'm going through all kinds of emotions. And even like, here's another crazy story. Hartley Atkins is the market manager overseeing D.C. and Baltimore. And they forgot to turn my BlackBerry off. You remember BlackBerry?
Oh, yeah. Loved BlackBerry.
And so they turned my email off, but they forgot to turn my BlackBerry off. And so it's like 8:00 in the morning and it's going off and I open it in all caps, radio is great. And it's Hartley. And I'm like, what the hell? And so I open it because it's coming to me. I don't think I'm doing anything. And it's everybody. Again, all of my old friends, and we're still friends today. But it was all about how exciting it is to get rid of WSMJ, smooth jazz. And now they're going to be, I think they were like rock or something, which was an awful format to put to. And, that was embarrassing. I was like, oh my God. So I had to email Jeff Kapugi. He was the OM at the time. And I'm like, hey, can you turn off my BlackBerry or what? He goes, oh, my bad. And I was like, I was so annoyed. I hate my bad. So I go home and I fib to my daughter. I don't want to tell her that I lost my job because she was 8. I didn't know if that would scare her. Clear Channel was very generous to me, 15 years with that company. So they were generous with me, and I was about to sell my house. So I financially was going to be sound. And so I told my daughter, hey, I left my job to spend the whole summer with you. How about that? She's like, what?
You went from unemployed to the mom of the year.
Yes. And I was watching Facebook, and I didn't understand it, Chachi. And it was fear that led me to where I am today, but it's the good fear. I remember looking at Facebook and going, why the hell, as a Gen Xer, right? Most of us are born with a little disdain towards maybe like self-promotion or us, you know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff. And why would you put a photo of yourself on the internet? Like I was so grossed out. And that was the good fear that kicked in. All of a sudden I felt, Lori, if you don't understand why people are doing this, you are about to age yourself out of work. And so I talked to a couple of people, said, you know what I think I want to do? I think I want to move back home to Green Bay, Wisconsin. And I think I want to understand what Facebook and Twitter are to radio. And everybody said, if you leave Baltimore for Green Bay, you will destroy your career. And there was something in me, Chachi. You can't stop that when somebody believes in something. And I didn't even know what it was that I believed in. I just, for the first time, did not believe what these people were saying. And I had held them in highest regard my whole career. And so I ignored them, went back home to Green Bay, met with Jeff McCarthy. He oversees programming there, as you know. And he said, Lori, I could probably find you a radio station to run. And I go, no, I want to get into the digital space. And I said, this is fascinating to me, this stuff. And he said, okay. So he set up an interview with Duke Wright. And after about an hour, Duke said, Lori, I have no clue about anything that you just talked about, but you're so excited, I can't not hire you. So create your own title. Michael, his son, get her an office. And I had to create my own title, my own roles and responsibilities. And that's where the madness started, is at Midwest Communications.
What an amazing story. What a visionary Duke was. And yes. I mean,
remember, this is during a recession. This is October of 2008, when everything has crashed, when everybody's losing their jobs. He gave me a job that didn't even exist.
That's insane. That is absolutely insane. That must have felt fantastic, though. And now it's interesting to see that evolution in your career from going, really not having a lot of belief in yourself, not wanting to leave the nest, having to tell them that you're not ready for Tampa and then call back and tell them, well, I changed my mind. And now you pivot and you go and you sell someone like a Duke Wright, who's a titan in our industry, on how important digital is. I mean, that's an amazing
2008.
Amazing transformation.
Program directors would say this to me, and excuse my language. They would say, don't talk to me about that Facebook shit. I've got radio stations to run. I'd be like, okay.
I remember very, very clearly, why would you talk about Facebook on the air when you can talk about our station website? I mean, it is amazing how things have changed so dramatically, and the fact that you saw it coming like that.
And what I had to do, Chachi, is find a way to speak to the people in the back of the room, because I felt like I was the only person who was like, no, you have it wrong. This is not about saying Facebook on the radio or using Facebook as a website and losing all data and no control of the base. I would say this is the differentiator that radio finally has to the pure plays that are coming up. They can't create a personality persona. Remember, this is 2008, but they can't create a personality persona the way that radio station and its talent already has. This is about reminding people that they are seen and they are heard. This is about, I would say, like strengthening the base. And I just looked at this as this was the differentiator between, at first it was radio stations and pure plays. Today it's radio station. I've got stations, Chachi, that are building amazing communities on Facebook, but we own all the listeners and we own the data. And the radio station across the street that essentially plays the same music, essentially has the same type of talent, blah, blah, blah. There's no tangible evidence that social media drives ratings. But I always say it defies logic that if you're using social in a way that's reminding people that they matter and helping people feel a part of something, and the competitor isn't, you're winning. So
I completely agree. I think it's intrinsic to the brand. I mean, it depends so much on the brand or the extension of your brand. I just couldn't imagine the world where you don't have it. I can tell you what an integral part it is to our business, let alone a gigantic station.
You know, and I know that you know this for what you have built, Chachi. It is impressive and it's amazing. You are where you're supposed to be, because while both of us might have days that are tougher than others, a lot of days don't necessarily feel like work. And sometimes we breeze through things that we didn't even know we didn't know. And I find that in the social space, I never really was satisfied on air, and I've never really was satisfied as a program director. But I can tell you in the 12 years of learning the social space, and I still consider myself a student, I am precisely where I'm supposed to be, because sometimes things fly out of my mouth that I didn't even know that I knew. Yeah, and you go, "Whoa, that was good!"
Like, hey, where did I get that?
It's so important what I've learned when people ask, like, try as much as you can to align your core character with what you do for a living, because things will always flow. It'll always work out. It doesn't mean that every day is a great day. It just means everything's going to work out.
Very well put. Very well put. You know, love what you do adage, which I think is so important. And to your point, yeah, there's days that I'm certainly stressed out or unhappy, especially during the pandemic that we're in now, because it is an incredibly stressful time. But I still find myself so fortunate to be able to do what I do. And it is a privilege and an honor that we've been able to do this for such a long time.
Willing to push ourselves. Remember going back to the beginning of the interview, how my parents pushed me out?
Yeah.
Now I have to push myself out. Yeah. It's not easy. It's not scary. I fell into what some radio people fell into in 2008. Leaving programming for digital, what would people think? Well, she wasn't that great of a PD, so she went over to the digital side. You had to fight that noise. You know that there are people out there saying stuff like that. And so you had to fight that noise. You had to fight your own self, doubt, and you had to build up your own self-worth, because nobody wanted to talk about it.
I'm curious about, so now you've completely realigned and you're in this digital space, and Duke Wright hires you, and a visionary, and believes in your vision. And then Fred and Paul come knocking on your door, and now, arguably the biggest consultancy in the country. How does that happen?
That happens. Fred and Paul tell the story the best. They had found themselves in various meetings with the radio stations that they consult, and digital and social media start coming up, and they have no answers. And you know that you've got it together when you admit you don't have the answer. They never tried to fake it. They went, who do we find? And I believe that they found me on Twitter. I believe that that's their story, is somehow, and thank God I wasn't tweeting like a jerk, right? Like, I would have blown another opportunity. Like going back to the lack of self-worth and the leap from Mobile to Tampa, thank God I was watching what I tweeted, because I believe the guys found me there. And it just felt like Midwest Communications had run its course. And I say that respectfully because we're all still very close. I think I had done what I was meant to do there. So I joined Fred and Paul, and I always say God has a sense of humor, because I never really spoke publicly before. I did once at a Clear Channel market manager meeting once, and that was interesting. But I had never spoken public prior, and I had to get up. I think Conclave was my first speaking gig, and I was like, yeah, so look at the screen. I lost my train of thought. I could see Fred just sweat pouring out, like, oh my God, we just invested in this moron.
Well, and Fred is so polished when he's on stage. I mean,
oh my God. And there I am, like,
he might as well just be at the stage is Fred's living room. He's just super comfortable and at ease on stage. Yeah. It's hard to live up to.
I was very blessed to be there for 4 years, because he taught me more than he will ever know. And I tell him all the time, there's something important about mentors, and that is that they will take you in and they will clean you up. He taught me the art of diplomacy. And maybe, you know, what you were speaking about earlier in this interview, where it is natural for me building relationships with people, either companies that I serve or just people in general. Fred taught me a lot about diplomacy and bedside manner, and just by watching him. He never sat me down and said, okay, Lori, here are the 5 steps. I just watched him closely for 4 years, and it was a great gift to serve them.
It's interesting you bring that up. And I was listening to a podcast earlier this week. Seth Godin was being interviewed by Tim Ferriss, and authenticity came up, which we were talking about earlier. And Seth Godin was a bit critical. Obviously, authenticity is important, but he said authenticity cannot be a license for you to be self-absorbed. It can't be a license where, well, this is just me, so be it. And going back to Bubba, there's a point where maybe the authenticity was too much and it turned people off because you're like, oh, well, he's authentically arrogant or whatever it is. You have to have this melding of authenticity, but also diplomacy. And that's what it seems like you learned.
Here's one great memory, Chachi. I don't like conflict at all. I will hide under a desk. Even if I'm right and they're wrong, I'm going to make them right.
Sure.
Because I can. And so it's my first trip with Fred and Paul. Fred's saying something about the radio station. They're talking about the mothership at first. They're going to get into social media later. So I'm just sitting there observing. And Fred makes a suggestion, and the PD is like, I don't think that's right. Tell me where you came. And I tense up. I'm like, oh, no. And I watch Fred just so calm. The way that he was speaking with his program director completely disarmed the program director minutes later. And then a conversation happens, and then Fred eventually gets his way. And it was fascinating.
It's artful to watch that. I've spent a little bit of time with Fred, but I've seen Mike do that, McVay, and yes. I just sit in awe.
He does a great job at that.
And to your point, I don't like it either. And as you know, you get into a role, and eventually the time comes where you have to, unfortunately, be in these uncomfortable situations. And you actually, unfortunately, have to learn to be comfortable in these uncomfortable situations. And it's so difficult to do. But to see a master like Fred or a McVay do it, it is just something to behold.
So you learn. And I've seen Mike do it. McVay is equally awesome at it.
Yeah.
And so you learn to let people say, allow people to say what they have to say, be open to it, but not ever get defensive. It's something that I have hopefully passed on to my daughter, who's now 20. It's, look, if you can just learn to coexist with people that tense you up and never, ever, ever get defensive, you'll be so ahead of people your age.
You're 100% right. And it's still something so difficult for me to do because we're such built on feelings, and to not take things personal. And those are hard things to do. It's fascinating you bring that up, but I really do think it's a combination of being authentic, but at the same time having this diplomacy. So you're able to say what you feel, but in a way that isn't offensive.
Fred's big thing. What about, he would say stuff like that. What about maybe, perhaps, and so I would start doing, well, let's see. And like in his hands, he would do his hand thing. I started doing his hand thing. Well, what about if we looked at it from this angle?
In 215, you now get called by John and Lou Dickey to work at Cumulus.
That was tough, Chachi, because my respect and care and adoration for Fred and Paul Jacobs was so high and remains high. I think we're closer today than even when I was serving their company. But Lou was giving me an opportunity. You know, at 4 years as a consultant, I had wondered, do I even know what I'm doing? You get to a point like you make all these suggestions and rarely do you ever see a suggestion play out. So am I just giving like really shitty advice and people are just walking away? Or are these fantastic ideas and they're just not executing? And so Lou was not only going to give me an opportunity to see if I could create some type of effect with actual radio stations, because now I would be the vice president of social media. But that role did not exist. And so he was legitimizing social media, not necessarily me, but he was about to give, in 2015, social media a seat at the corporate table. And that was huge.
Sure.
social media to this day does not have a seat at the corporate table. So that was a moment in history to allow social media to be sitting there with all the other heads of the areas that run radio. And it was tough. And when I called Fred and Paul, it was tough, but they understood. Again, I think my time there had run its course. It was time for me to see if I knew what I was talking about, if I knew what I was writing about, if I knew what I was speaking about. It's real easy to be in that consultant chair and go blah, blah, blah. But can you get it done? Can you execute it? And when you execute it, were there actual results? I needed to know that. So I am always so thankful to Lou. I was there 3 years, right? I left 2018.
That, and again, going from someone who had to be pushed out of the nest in Green Bay and not having confidence to being across the board table from two of the, and I know John and Lou have controversial reputations, but to your point, they've always been phenomenal to me, and I owe a great deal of our success to them and the belief that they had in us. And there's no arguing that they're some of the smartest guys that I have ever met. Stanford grads, incredibly, incredibly intelligent. And when I would have conversations with them, I just always felt like outmatched. They were just so smart. What did that feel like being now in that room with them?
It was quite intimidating because of everything you just said. I mean, here I am, the Twitter girl, right? Like, they're looking at P&Ls, bottom line, like McVay's in the room and he's saying all this really smart stuff about, programming and podcasting. And I'm like, well, over on Twitter, there's 200,000 tweets that go out every single second. Like, who cares? So I had to up my game, and I really had to find a way. And I was lucky. Fred Jacobs had exposed me to the David Fields of the world, the Peter Smyths when he was running Greater Media, Dan Mason when he was running CBS. So part of my trajectory in the social space has been communicating with CEOs and or SVPs of programming. So when you get to that level of communicating to people that don't care about social media, and rightfully so, they only care about the bottom line, you have to find a way to talk about social media that keeps their attention. Otherwise, they zone out. So part of that prep, knowing with Jacobs Media, helped me in front of Lou and in front of Mike, because I would remember what would inspire David Field. We would have conversations, and I would take that and just kind of apply it to Lou. So I did have a little bit of a background of interacting with CEOs. It's not easy to talk to somebody who doesn't care about social media. They know social media is important, but they don't use it. And what is it going to bring to the bottom line in ratings? And you're like, nothing. you have to start talking about intangibles. And how awful is that when you have CEOs that don't know the power of intangibles? There's a quote, Howard Schultz, former CEO, founder of Starbucks, right? He's got this quote, I'm going to butcher it, but intangibles make up the fabric of a brand, and to forsake it takes a subtle toll on the brand. I've just butchered it. I'm sorry.
I get it, and I've read one of his. He has a few books, but I've read one of them, and you're 100% right. When you look at, and you just use coffee as an example, a cup of coffee is a cup of coffee, and certainly there's a difference because I know where they source their beans and the way that they're brewed and so forth, and there are a lot of different differences. But at the end of the day, it's still a cup of coffee. It's how that brand is built around that cup of coffee, that experience that they've created, the barista. Everything around it. And I completely agree with that. It's the difference between Coca-Cola and brown sugary water, right?
Yes.
Coca-Cola is...
So you're the person in the room. You're the intangible. Everybody else, they have tangible results to their strategy. And I'm over there like, well, it's building the brand. So kudos to Lou.
He saw that even though he may not understand it, he understood that he needed it and that it was an important ingredient to success.
Yes. That's how I ended up in Atlanta. When I left Cumulus Westwood One, Lou and I just left. I emailed him and said, thank you for the opportunity 3 years ago. I ended up leaving, blah, blah, blah. I hope you and the family are well. And that's when he emailed back and said, wait, come on down to Atlanta. And I was like, for what? And he's like, modern luxury. It needs help with social media. And so again.
Oh, I didn't understand. So you were in Detroit while you were working with Cumulus, and then you moved to Atlanta to work with Modern Luxury.
Yes, that
makes sense
was
now.
very generous of Lou. My daughter was, what was Carly, like a freshman in high school, and I was not going to move her. I couldn't. I already moved her too many times. And so I remember saying to Lou, I hope I'm not blowing what sounds like a great opportunity, but I would need to work remotely because I have a daughter in high school. And he didn't even flinch. He's like, oh, no problem. Just come down to Atlanta once a month, hang out with us, but we'll get you an office in Detroit because they had stations in Detroit. So, fast forward, he does know the importance of social media. He just doesn't want, and smart people do that. I know that you do that, Chachi. People know what's important, but they just don't need their hands in everything.
Yeah. Well, you have to recognize what you're good at and what you're not good at. And there's no arguing that Lou was incredibly good at finance and incredibly good at Wall Street and understanding that part. And that in of itself is a full-time job. And, I think you have some some leaders that start to, micromanage everything, and you just can't. And not only can you not do it, but the fact of the matter is you're just most likely not good at it, right? And a lot of people get caught up in that.
I love that you brought this up because, go back to 2011 when I joined Jacobs Media, I had realized there really is a difference between a digital person and a social media type marketing person. And one's not better than the other. But I realized two things were happening. My interest in digital was waning because social was coming so naturally. But I also inherently knew you better stand for one thing. I didn't even know that I knew this, right? I know I've said that a couple of times my whole life. I didn't know that I don't know what I don't know, or I didn't know I knew it. And I had realized I started gravitating more towards the social media space because if I was going to be like, oh, she knows everything, I was going to become that person that knows a little bit about a lot.
Right.
And I wanted to know a lot about one thing. And that was online development, like online audience development. So that's one reason why I ended up kind of dropping the digital part of my career and really honing in on social.
Smart. Really smart. Walk me through how Conclave came to be, or how you became the chair, I should say.
It's a great story. So the Conclave board calls me January 2015. And Chachi, I mean, that it was pretty much all but dead. I mean, in 2014, it was like a half day. It was the Saturday before Thanksgiving in Minneapolis. Blizzard, holiday coming up, and they choose it's just bad. And I say this all respectfully, but it's the truth. They call me in January, the thing's dead, and we would like to invite you to chair the conclave and breathe some life back into it. And I never asked how they came up with my name. I said, you know what? Let me think on this. I consulted with Fred right away. Look, I don't want to attach my name to a loser, and this thing is all but dead. And I've been very careful in everything that I do in my career, and I just don't know if I feel good about this. Fred and Paul, look, we have your back. If you want to, take it for 1 year. Don't commit to anything but 1 year. We have your back. We'll give you the time you need to build it. We'll give you the contacts. We have your back if you want to do it. And I said, all right, let me think on it. And so when I went home that night, I emailed about 5 people. Kim Guthrie was running Cox at the time, Ginny Morris Hubbard. I emailed Brad Hardin, Jim Ryan. All I wanted from these 5 people is the conclave is considering me as chair. I'm very nervous about this because you all know the thing's all but dead. Would you be willing to help in the way of either having people from your company come speak, whoever I was emailing? Would you speak? Could I count on you if I do this? Because I need people like you to help this, because nobody really cares who Lori Lewis is, but they care who Ginny Morris is. And all of them immediately, it was nighttime, so it was easier for them to respond. They all emailed back, anything for you. And so then I picked up the phone and called Tom Kay and said, you know what, you got it. I'm on for 1 year. Let's do it.
I think it's fantastic that you took on that responsibility, and you've done remarkable things with it. And I think it's a phenomenal convention. And obviously, I know this year with COVID, everything got changed, but I'm looking forward to next year, and anything that we can do to help, please don't hesitate to ask. But
absolutely. I have always loved the Benztown bingo.
That's right. The social media bingo.
Because it's so much fun. You know, it's for those who don't know, it's the Benztown social media conclave bingo. And we make actual cards, and the cards will be like, take a selfie with Tony Coles. And it's so funny. Tony won't know his name. He can't see the card. And all these people are coming up, and, you know, it's like, what was another one? Like, high five, Valerie Geller. Yeah. So high five, Valerie. She's like, why is everybody high fiving?
Really close.
Oh, you're part of the bingo. So thank you for always supporting that.
And I think it's great that you give so much back to the industry, and giving to that event is fantastic. And I think it's, of all the events that are still around, so many are gone now, like Gavin and R&R and so forth, but that is just an event that's dear to so many people's hearts, and I'm glad that it's not only still around, but it's growing again, and I congratulate you on it. And
thanks. I think the intimate setting, we get about 250 people. And I think that that's probably as big as maybe we're ever going to get, which I'm fine, because everybody seems to like that smaller setting. Because when somebody like Chachi from Benztown is walking around, they can stop you in the hallway and they can talk. And, the only thing that I ever do as speakers is when somebody stops and wants to ask you a question or something, please be kind. Stop and either say, hey, I'm on my way to a meeting. Give me your card. Let's meet up. Let's email. And everybody does that. I
also love, too, you do such a great job of integrating students into it, and, having youth that want to get into the business, which is, I think, direly needed. So you do an amazing job with that as well. There's
been a couple of kids that have gotten hired because of Conclave.
Oh, that's great.
So I don't, between you and me, I don't know if that's good or bad.
That's a good point.
It's Conclave. It's on the radio.
Lori,
alley drinking.
So last year you decide to leave Modern Luxury and start Lori Lewis Media and hang up your own shingle.
I did.
Congratulations.
Chachi, do you remember the first year of Benztown?
I do. And I remember a mentor of mine telling me, Bill Leopold, who Dave Kaz's manager, you were talking about Dave Kaz earlier, and just a great guy. We were actually renting space from him at the time in Burbank. And he said, you're going to look back at this as being like the best time of your life. And I can honestly say that first year, as chaotic and crazy as it was, I remember sitting across from me is Kevin. Kevin was our fourth employee. And I remember distinctly after we hired him, we went out for drinks to celebrate. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to pay his salary next week.
Yeah.
Really, I honestly sat there thinking that. And somehow I haven't paid him in 10 years and he's still here. But so it is so scary. But at the same time, it is incredibly fun and invigorating to do it. And Bill was right in a lot of levels. I do miss that time of it. I'm certainly very happy that I am where we are now, but
yes,
there is something about the newness and the excitement. It's like a new relationship, when you're starting a new company.
It's scary. It's not for the faint of heart, is it? It's
no.
Not. You're now the checks now don't come on the 1st and 15th, right? Now you are okay, so you have a roster, but then COVID happens and you're like, oh, that's nice. Okay.
And COVID, is the definition of a black swan event.
Yes.
Excuse me. No one could ever have had planned for this or even, vaguely known what to do. I think we're all feeling our way through this as best we possibly can. And I feel incredibly fortunate that we're still alive and kicking when 20% of the businesses in this country have shut their doors forever, when we've seen, unfortunately, just a tremendous amount of layoffs in the industry, and not just our industry, but in multiple industries. There's over 22 million people now that have been laid off in this country. And, I think the closest thing to this was probably the Depression in the 30s. And it is unlike anything. And so to start a new business and then a year later that happens is my God.
Well, do you do this though? I am so thankful for you and Mike McVay and my other clients. I know that 5 years down the road, you, Mike, my other clients will always, assuming that we're still working together, even if we're not, you will always be so important. You always remember your first supporters, don't you?
Oh, for sure.
I always remember them.
For sure. I can remember the first handful of stations that we signed.
Yes.
I absolutely remember those. And I will predict that you're going to have a tremendous amount of success. I think today's announcement that Pfizer just put out is incredibly positive, and we saw the stock market go up tremendously today on that news. And I think we're in for, unfortunately, a very dark winter, but we will get to the other side of this winter, and I think things will be tremendously better for us all. As horrible as this has been, and it will continue to be horrible for a bit longer, I think it also presents opportunities, and I think you will be the benefit of a lot of those opportunities.
Yes, it's tough. I feel, we've talked about this before, I feel very blessed that I actually have clients in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah.
But my entire client roster are literally some of the smartest people in radio, because even during a pandemic, you still have to develop an audience. You can't just go, well, I got to forego social media. I got to forego email marketing. I got to forego everything because it's a pandemic. Like right now, more than ever, brands in and out of radio should be focused on social and digital. I mean, more so than ever right now. So those that I get to serve today, I'm not just super grateful for, because you always remember your first, but really the smartest, because they're not stopping just because of a pandemic.
Right. Something that largely goes lost in what customers are looking for, because it's not particularly sexy, is consistency. Yeah. Customers want, when you go to your favorite restaurant, you order your favorite burger, whatever it may be, you want to know it's going to come out the way that you like it. You want it to be consistent. You want to know every time you crack open go to Starbucks, we'll use that you have your Frappuccino or whatever it may be, that it's going to taste the way that you want it to taste, that the service is going to be the way that you have grown accustomed to. And so that consistency, the minute, and I believe that companies make a big mistake, and I believe stations make a big mistake by all of a sudden becoming inconsistent. And consistency is more important now when people are fearful than it is when times are good. You will have a bigger appetite to be more adventuresome when everything's going well. You're like, oh, why not? But now you want things to be very consistent. And to your point, I think to pull back on your social or to pull back on your branding or your marketing is a big mistake.
It is. And you know what I enjoy is you walk the talk. Like everything that you said is so smart, and Benztown does that. You are so consistent with your marketing and really well done, right? Susan and Laura, who else is in? I mean, you have some really brilliant, bright people.
Yeah, we're very lucky. Lisa Dollinger is a big help. And we've been fortunate to have the team around us. Lori, it's been incredible to talk to you. My last question for you is your daughter, who I know you're incredibly proud of. Will she follow in your footsteps and go down the path of radio, or what is she thinking?
She's going to get into marketing. I begged her. I told her I would up the life insurance to $1 million if she would just get into radio, follow my foot tracks. I was bribing her. No, she wants to do marketing. She does love social media marketing, and she has interned for me. So she does love social media marketing, but she's not going to go down the Anita Wad.
Lori, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a blast, and I look forward to seeing you in person soon, and hopefully a conclave in 2021 and to a much better year next year.
Yes. Thank you, Chachi.